In 1975, a teenage girl in Virginia was pressured to give up her newborn daughter for adoption. She was told the baby would go to a loving family, that she would have a better life than her young mother could provide. She named the child Alexis Badger before saying goodbye, believing she was doing the right thing. The baby was adopted by Dennis and Brenda Bowman of Michigan. They renamed her Aundria Bowman. For the next 14 years, Alexis became Andrea, growing up in a world her birth mother knew nothing about. In March 1989, Aundria Bowman vanished from her family's rural property in Hamilton, Michigan. Her adoptive father told police she had stolen money and run away. Case closed. Just another troubled teenager who disappeared. But the birth mother who gave her up never stopped wondering what happened to the daughter she named Alexis. And 30 years later, her relentless search would uncover a truth more horrifying than anyone imagined. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we uncover another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. This is the story of Aundria Bowman and the monster who adopted her. Kathy Turkanian was just 17 years old when she gave birth to a baby girl in 1974. She named her Alexis Badger, a name chosen with love and hope for a child she desperately wanted to keep. But Kathy was young, unmarried, and living with her mother, who had other ideas. According to Kathy, her mother went to Catholic charities and set the wheels of adoption in motion without her full understanding or consent. At 17, Kathy felt she had no power to resist. The decision was made for her. Her daughter would be given to a family who could provide the stability and security that a teenage mother could not. In 1975, when Alexis was about 9 months old, she was adopted by Dennis and Brenda Bowman, a couple from Michigan. The Bowmans changed her name to Aundria Bowman, erasing the identity her birth mother had given her. The adoption records were sealed, as was standard practice at the time. Kathy was left with nothing but memories and the hope that her daughter was living a good life somewhere. She had no idea that she had handed her child to a predator. Dennis Lee Bowman was born in 1949. He served in the United States Navy, a fact that would later prove significant to his criminal history. He married Brenda Engweiler in 1971, and the couple settled in Michigan. On the surface, they appeared to be an ordinary American family, the kind that adoption agencies were eager to match with children in need of homes. But beneath the surface, Dennis Bowman was something else entirely. In May 1980, just 5 years after adopting Andrea, Dennis Bowman attacked a teenage girl in western Michigan. He attempted to lure her into a wooded area with the intention of sexually assaulting her. The girl escaped, and Bowman was arrested. In February 1981, he was convicted of assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. While Dennis sat in prison, Andrea remained in the care of Brenda Bowman. He was released on January 1st, 1986, when Andrea was 11 years old. What happened in that household after Dennis returned home would only become clear decades later, when his surviving victims and Andrea's friends began to speak. According to testimony that would emerge years later, Aundria Bowman was being sexually abused by her adoptive father. When she was around 13 or 14 years old, she found the courage to tell her adoptive mother what was happening. She told me one morning that Dad molested her, Brenda Bowman later testified in court, and I told her, "That's a lie, and you know it." Rather than protecting her daughter, Brenda dismissed the allegation. She took Aundria to a minister where, under pressure, the teenager recanted her story. The abuse, if it ever stopped at all, continued in silence. But Andrea had also told people outside the family. Staff at her school became involved, and police were called. According to reports, Andrea told investigators that her adoptive father was molesting her. A social worker returned Andrea to the family home and confronted Dennis and Brenda about the allegations. Both parents denied everything, claiming that Andrea's rebellious behavior had been sparked by their recent disclosure that she was adopted. The authorities accepted this explanation. Andrea was returned to her abusers. Shortly after the molestation allegations surfaced, the Bowman family relocated. They moved from their previous residence to a mobile home in a rural area of Allegan County, Michigan. The isolation would prove fatal. Andrea's friends from that time have spoken about what they witnessed. They described a girl living in fear, subject to physical abuse as well as sexual. They urged her to leave, to escape the nightmare of her adoptive home. But Andrea refused. The reason was her little sister. In 1988, Dennis and Brenda Bowman had a biological daughter, Vanessa. Andrea, just 14 years old, became fiercely protective of the baby. She helped care for Vanessa constantly, changing her diapers, feeding her bottles, watching over her. When her friends begged her to run away, Andrea said she couldn't leave Vanessa alone with their father. She was panic-stricken about leaving her little sister there by herself. One friend recalled in the Netflix documentary, Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter. She said she was going to leave when Vanessa was older and go find her real mom. Andrea never got that chance. March 11, 1989, began like any other Saturday in the Bowman household. Andrea had recently returned from a school band concert. The family had met with representatives from a tutoring program through Hope College, who reported that Andrea wasn't completing her homework assignments despite receiving help from college tutors. Dennis and Brenda were frustrated with their daughter's performance. According to the official story that would be told for the next 30 years, Dennis dropped Brenda off at work that afternoon. When he returned home, Andrea was supposed to be working on her homework, but she was gone. Dennis Bowman reported his daughter missing to the Allegan County Sheriff's Office around 3:30 that afternoon. He claimed that Andrea had argued with her parents over her grades, stolen approximately $100 to $150 from their dresser, taken some clothing and personal items, including her purple coat, and run away. There was no indication of foul play, he insisted. She had done this before. She was a troubled teenager who had been acting out ever since learning she was adopted. She would probably come back on her own. The police response reflected the attitudes of the time. A warrant was issued for Andrea's arrest on charges of larceny, with Dennis listed as the victim. The case was classified as a juvenile runaway and transferred to the Youth Services Bureau. No serious investigation was conducted. In the months that followed, there were reported sightings of Andrea. Brenda Bowman told police she had seen a girl who looked like her daughter at a 7-Eleven convenience store at the end of March 1989. Another sighting was reported at a Meijer supermarket in October. There were claims she had been spotted in nearby Holland at a skating rink, even as far away as Indiana. But none of these sightings led anywhere. The tips dried up. The case went cold. Aundria Bowman was just another name on a list of runaways who never came home. The years passed. The Bowman family moved to a new house on 136th Avenue in Monterey Township, Allegan County, in late 1989, or early 1990. It was a fresh start, or so it appeared. Dennis continued his life, outwardly unremarkable, a father and husband living in rural Michigan. He worked various jobs over the years, never staying anywhere too long, never drawing too much attention to himself. On the surface, he was just another middle-aged man living a quiet life in the country. But there were signs for those who cared to look. In 1998, Dennis Bowman was arrested again, this time for breaking into a female co-worker's home in Ottawa County. He had stolen items including women's lingerie, a fetish that spoke to the darker impulses he had never truly controlled. Before his sentencing, he wrote a letter to the judge that included a chilling line. "I am the father of 2 lovely daughters, one 25 and the other 11, and feel that being a parent is one of the most important and sobering things a person can undertake." He was referring to Andrea as if she were still alive, still out there somewhere, as if she had simply grown up and moved away. He knew perfectly well that Andrea was dead, that her remains were buried in his backyard, that he had killed her with his own hands. But he wrote about her as though she were a living, breathing woman of 25. It was a monstrous deception, a lie so brazen that it defied comprehension. He was sentenced for the break-in and served his time. Life went on. The Allegan County Sheriff's Office and the Michigan State Police kept Andrea's case open, but there were no leads, no evidence, no way to move the investigation forward. Dennis Bowman was never eliminated as a suspect in his daughter's disappearance, but there was nothing concrete to tie him to her fate. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, Kathy Turkanian had built a life of her own. She had married Edward Turkanian, found happiness, and settled in Gloucester. But she never stopped thinking about the daughter she had given up. She had asked the adoption agency in Virginia to keep her contact information on file, in case Alexis ever tried to find her birth mother. In 2010, more than 20 years after Andrea disappeared, Kathy received a letter that would change everything. The letter came from a social worker at the adoption agency. It explained that the daughter Kathy had named Alexis had been adopted by a family in Michigan who renamed her Andrea, and that Andrea had disappeared in 1989 when she was 14 years old. The agency was writing because a Jane Doe had been found in a Wisconsin cornfield in 1999, and authorities thought it might be Andrea. They needed a DNA sample from Kathy to compare. Kathy was stunned. For all those years, she had imagined her daughter living a normal life somewhere, perhaps wondering about her birth mother, perhaps not. She had never imagined this. Her daughter was missing, had been missing for over 2 decades, and no one had thought to tell her. She provided the DNA sample and was told it could take years to process. But Kathy was not content to wait. She began her own investigation. She set up a Facebook page called Find Aundria M. Bowman and asked anyone who had known Andrea to get in touch. The response was immediate and devastating. People who had known Andrea as a teenager came forward with stories of abuse. Friends described witnessing Dennis Bowman's violence, seeing Andrea flinch at sudden movements, hearing her talk about the horrors of her home life. Kathy learned about the molestation allegations, about Andrea's desperate desire to protect her baby sister, about the way authorities had dismissed her cries for help. "Nobody was there to protect my daughter," Kathy said. "She wasn't adopted into a good family. I mean, just look at his history." Kathy also connected with Carl Koppelman, an amateur sleuth who had been investigating cold cases online. Koppelman became what Kathy called the game changer in her search. Together, they dug into Dennis Bowman's background and discovered his 1981 conviction for sexual assault. The picture that emerged was horrifying. Kathy became convinced that Dennis Bowman had killed her daughter. In 2013, the DNA results finally came back. The Jane Doe found in Wisconsin was not Aundria. Kathy felt a strange mix of relief and despair. Her daughter's remains had not been found, which meant the mystery continued. The Jane Doe was later identified as Peggy Johnson, another victim whose story deserved telling, but who was not Kathy's daughter. But the negative result only intensified Kathy's determination. If Andrea was not in Wisconsin, where was she? What had Dennis Bowman done with her? She began a campaign of pressure that would last for years, a relentless pursuit of truth that would eventually be chronicled in a Netflix documentary. She put up missing person posters around the Bowmans' neighborhood, plastering them on telephone poles and bulletin boards. She bought billboard space along the main road to their house, Route 36, offering an $11,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. The billboard was impossible to miss, a constant reminder to Dennis and Brenda that someone was watching, someone was waiting, someone would not let Andrea be forgotten. She called the Bowmans multiple times a day, demanding answers. She showed up in their neighborhood, sitting in her car on surveillance, watching their house, waiting for any sign of the truth. Neighbors noticed her, wondered who she was, eventually learned her story, and understood her mission. She flew a drone over the Bowman property, capturing aerial footage of their backyard. She pored over Google Maps satellite imagery, studying every square foot of the yard for any sign of disturbance. Something about that backyard bothered her. There was a cement structure that didn't quite fit, a patch of ground that seemed wrong. Her mother's instinct told her that Andrea was there, hidden in plain sight. She even confronted Brenda Bowman directly at a Missing in Michigan conference in 2013. The encounter was heated, with Kathy accusing Brenda of negligence and failure to protect Andrea, and Brenda insisting that her husband was innocent and that Andrea had simply run away. The confrontation exposed the vast gulf between what the adoptive family claimed and what Kathy believed. But instinct wasn't evidence. The police couldn't dig up the Bowmans' yard on a hunch, no matter how strong that hunch was, and Dennis Bowman continued to deny any involvement in his daughter's disappearance, presenting himself as a grieving father who simply didn't know where his troubled daughter had gone. The breakthrough came not from Andrea's case, but from another cold case entirely. On September 9th, 1980, Kathleen Doyle, a 25-year-old woman living in Norfolk, Virginia, had a friend over for a couple of glasses of wine. Her husband, a Navy pilot, was deployed aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Kathleen was living alone in their small house on Granby Street in the Ocean View neighborhood, waiting for him to return. Their friend left around 9:30 that evening. Kathleen was found dead 2 days later, on September 11th, 1980. The scene that confronted investigators was horrific. Kathleen had been strangled, what police would later describe as mechanical asphyxiation. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed twice, once in the chest and once in the back. Her hands were tied behind her back. She was bruised all over her body, evidence of a violent struggle. There was another disturbing detail. A circular burn mark was found on Kathleen's right cheek. In her bathroom trash, investigators discovered a Lincoln log toy with one scorched end. The killer had used it to burn her face. Kathleen was the daughter of a naval officer and the wife of a Navy pilot. She was young, beautiful, and innocent. She had done nothing to deserve this fate. Her only crime was being home alone when a monster came to her door. The case went cold for nearly 40 years. There were no fingerprints, no clear suspects among the neighbors. Kathleen's father spent the rest of his life in regular contact with detectives, hoping to see his daughter's killer brought to justice. He died without that satisfaction, never knowing that the man who murdered his daughter was living freely in Michigan, raising a family, working ordinary jobs, hiding in plain sight. But in 2018, the Norfolk Cold Case Unit learned about a new investigative technique, genetic genealogy. The same technology that had helped identify the Golden State Killer was now being applied to cold cases across the country. Detectives had a DNA profile from evidence found on Kathleen's bedspread. They decided to try. The genealogy company built a Y chromosome DNA profile and used genetic matching to compile a list of possible suspects. They returned 32 names. Dennis Bowman was number 31 on that list. When Detective John Smith of the Norfolk Police began investigating Bowman, he was alarmed by what he found: a conviction for sexual assault in 1981, an attempted kidnapping of a teenage girl in 1980, just months before Kathleen's murder, and a missing adopted daughter who had vanished under suspicious circumstances in 1989. At a law enforcement conference, Smith happened to meet Detective Sergeant Brian Fuller of the Michigan State Police, who was very familiar with the Aundria Bowman case. "I'll tell you, John," Fuller said. "I know Dennis, and I know his family. He's probably your guy." Further investigation revealed that Dennis Bowman had been in Norfolk on a 2-week military drill in September 1980, at the exact time Kathleen Doyle was murdered. The DNA was tested. It matched. On November 22, 2019, Dennis Bowman, now 70 years old, was arrested at his home in Michigan and charged with the 1980 murder of Kathleen Doyle. For Kathy Turkanian, it was the moment she had been waiting for. She knew that with Bowman in custody, the chances of learning the truth about Andrea had just increased dramatically. While awaiting extradition to Virginia, Dennis Bowman was held in the Allegan County Jail. Investigators used the opportunity to build rapport with him, listening to his stories, understanding his background, before asking direct questions about his potential wrongdoing. In December 2019, Brenda Bowman visited her husband in jail. During that conversation, Dennis began to talk about Andrea. He said they had gotten into an argument on the day she disappeared. She had threatened to tell the counselors again that he was molesting her. He had slapped her, and she had fallen down the stairs. She died from the fall, he claimed. In a panic, he had disposed of her body in the neighbor's trash. It was the first time in 30 years that Dennis Bowman had admitted any involvement in his daughter's death. But investigators knew this wasn't the full truth. Over the following weeks, Bowman gave several different versions of events. In one account, he said he had pushed Andrea down the stairs after she threatened to publicly accuse him of molestation. After she died, he cut up her body with a machete. He told investigators they could find the weapon under his bed, but he still wouldn't say what he had done with the body. On February 4th, 2020, during a phone call with Brenda that was being recorded, Dennis finally revealed the truth. "So near, so far, right under your nose," he said cryptically. "What the heck are you talking about?" Brenda asked. "Andrea. She's buried in the backyard." The words hit like a thunderbolt. For 30 years, the truth had been hidden in plain sight. Every day that Brenda had walked through her backyard, every time she had looked out the kitchen window, every moment she had spent in that house, her daughter's remains had been just beneath her feet. Dennis explained what he had done. After killing Andrea, he had placed her remains in a barrel and buried it on their old property in Hamilton. When the family moved to the new house on 136th Avenue in 1990, just months after the murder, he had dug up the barrel and transported it to their new backyard. He buried it again beneath a thin layer of cement, a small structure that blended into the landscape. "I dug the hole, and I put the barrel in," he said. "She's been right there the whole time." The casual way he described it, the matter-of-fact tone, revealed the depths of his depravity. He had lived above his daughter's grave for 3 decades. He had barbecued in the backyard while she decomposed beneath the soil. He had celebrated holidays, watched television, gone about the ordinary business of life, all while keeping this monstrous secret. Kathy Turkanian's instinct had been right all along. The cement structure she had spotted on her drone surveillance, the patch of ground that had seemed wrong to her mother's eye, was exactly where Andrea had been buried. On February 5, 2020, authorities announced they had found human remains in a shallow grave at the Bowman property on 136th Avenue in Monterey Township. The cement structure that had caught Kathy's attention during her drone surveillance marked the spot where Andrea had been buried for 3 decades. DNA testing confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains were those of Aundria Michelle Bowman, born Alexis Miranda Badger. The forensic examination revealed the extent of the horror. According to police, Dennis Bowman had struck Andrea, causing her to die from a head injury. He then dismembered her body using an axe and a machete, placed the remains in a barrel, and buried her in the backyard. When the family moved, he exhumed his daughter's remains and reburied them at the new property. For 30 years, Andrea had been hidden in the backyard of the family home. For 30 years, the Bowmans had lived above her grave. For 30 years, her birth mother had searched for answers that were buried just beneath the surface. Dennis Bowman was extradited to Virginia in February 2020 to face charges in Kathleen Doyle's murder. On June 10, 2020, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and burglary. He was sentenced to 2 life terms for the murder and rape, plus 20 years for burglary. In May 2020, while still in Virginia, Bowman was charged in Michigan with open murder, felony murder, first-degree child abuse, and mutilation of a body in connection with Andrea's death. In December 2021, Dennis Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder as a habitual offender. A no-contest plea means accepting the punishment without admitting guilt. On February 7, 2022, he was sentenced to 35 to 50 years in prison for Andrea's murder. At the sentencing, prosecutors described Andrea as friends and family had known her, a sweet young girl who loved to talk with friends, who was fiercely protective of her baby sister, who dreamed of one day finding her real mother and starting a new life. That life was taken from her at 14 years old by the man who was supposed to protect her. Kathy Turkanian attended the sentencing in Allegan County. She had waited more than 30 years for this moment, for the truth to finally come to light. "I'm sad, but relieved he finally told the truth," she said. "It's been a very long, difficult journey, but I did it all because I love Alexis." She continued to call her daughter by her birth name, the name Kathy had chosen for her, the identity that had been erased by the adoptive family that destroyed her. The story of Aundria Bowman was brought to wider attention in September 2024 with the release of Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, a 2-part Netflix documentary directed by Ryan White and produced by Charlize Theron. The film chronicles Kathy Turkanian's decade-long quest to discover what happened to her biological daughter. The documentary rose to the #3 spot in the Netflix Global Top 10 in its first week, bringing Andrea's story to millions of viewers around the world. It exposed the failures of the systems that were supposed to protect children, the authorities who dismissed a teenager's allegations of sexual abuse, the adoption practices that placed a vulnerable child in the hands of a predator. The film included interrogation footage of Dennis Bowman, showing him spinning his web of lies, claiming he had accidentally hit Aundria and that she had died from a fall down the stairs. It showed the moment when investigators finally got him to reveal the location of the body, the quiet horror of a confession delivered without remorse. It also showed the emotional toll on Kathy Turkanian, the years of searching, the frustration of dealing with authorities who seemed indifferent, the triumph and tragedy of finally learning the truth. Viewers were outraged by what they saw. The response on social media was overwhelming, with people expressing fury at the system that had failed Andrea, admiration for Kathy's persistence, and disgust at Dennis Bowman's depravity. The documentary also raised uncomfortable questions about Brenda Bowman's role in the tragedy. She had been told by her daughter that Dennis was molesting her, and she had called it a lie. She had lived in the same house as the backyard grave for decades. What did she know? What did she suspect? How could she have remained blind for so long? Brenda has never been charged with any crime. She testified against her husband during his preliminary hearing, describing how he had eventually confessed to her during that jail phone call. She claimed to have been shocked by the revelation, to have had no idea that Andrea was buried behind their home. But for many observers, including Kathy Turkanian, Brenda's claims of ignorance ring hollow. For Kathy, the attention has been bittersweet. She finally knows the truth about what happened to her daughter. She has seen Dennis Bowman brought to justice. But the victory came at a cost that can never be measured. I don't know if Alexis was left-handed or right-handed, Kathy said in the documentary. I don't know what her voice sounded like. She never said, "I love you, Mommy." She never called me Mommy. These simple words carry the weight of a lifetime of loss. Kathy gave up her daughter, hoping to give her a better life. Instead, she delivered her into the hands of a killer. It is a burden that no mother should have to carry, a guilt that no logic can assuage. In the years since the documentary's release, Kathy has continued to fight for her daughter. She has petitioned for custody of Andrea's remains, seeking to give her a proper burial under her birth name, Alexis Miranda Badger. According to Kathy, Brenda Bowman has claimed that Andrea's ashes were scattered over a relative's grave in Muskegon, but Kathy remains skeptical of this claim. Kathy has also advocated for Andrea's birth name to be restored on legal documents, seeking to remove Dennis Bowman's name from her birth certificate and to posthumously adopt her daughter. It is a symbolic gesture, but symbols matter. Andrea was given a name by her birth mother, a name that was stolen from her by the adoptive family that destroyed her. Kathy wants that name back. She has become an advocate for reforms in adoption practices and child welfare, working with organizations like Saving Our Sisters that help mothers in difficult situations keep their children rather than surrendering them to adoption. She is determined that no other child should suffer, as Andrea did, that no other mother should experience the nightmare she has lived through. I don't think I'll ever be at peace Kathy has said. I don't think I can plan that. It's just going to happen when it happens. I'm a little less angry until I start thinking about Brenda. The anger is understandable. So is the grief. Kathy Turkanian lost her daughter twice. Once when she gave her up for adoption, and once when she learned that Andrea had been murdered. Both losses were preventable. Both were the result of systems that failed a vulnerable child. Dennis Bowman is now in his mid-70s, serving his sentences in prison. He will almost certainly die behind bars. It is the least he deserves. The story of Aundria Bowman is one of the most heartbreaking in the annals of American crime. A child given up by a mother who loved her, adopted by a family that abused her, murdered by the man who called himself her father, and buried in his backyard for 30 years while the world forgot she existed. It is also a story of a mother's love that refused to die. Kathy Turkanian never stopped looking for her daughter. Even when the authorities called her a nuisance, even when the leads went nowhere, even when decades passed without answers, she kept searching. Her persistence, her refusal to accept the official story, ultimately brought a killer to justice. The mother-daughter bond goes, I don't care what people think, Kathy said. I care about what happened to this child, so just move out of my way. Aundria Bowman was born Alexis Miranda Badger on June 23, 1974. She died on or around March 11, 1989, at the age of 14. For 30 years, she was a missing person, a cold case, a forgotten name on a list of runaways. Now she is remembered. Now her story is told. Now her killer is in prison, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. But Andrea will never grow up. She will never find her birth mother on her own terms. She will never escape the nightmare of her childhood and build the life she dreamed of. She will always be 14 years old, a girl who loved her little sister, who hoped to one day be free. She left her house that morning. 30 years later, the truth was buried in the backyard. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care with your loved ones.